The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I'm Carrie Saldo. Good morning. It is Friday, January 31st, 2025. 1 month down in 2025, 11 to go here, folks. What are you tracking on your calendar? You can email us your thoughts, therundown@nepm.org. And now, let's get to the thoughts of this week's Rundowners. Joining me in studio this morning, NEPM reporter Nirvani Williams, veteran reporter and columnist G. Michael Dobbs, and Springfield Republican Enterprise reporter Namu Sempath. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
A number of news outlets have brought local context to the directives that we've been seeing at the national level from President Donald Trump as he's kind of settled into his first week or so back in the Oval Office. And local reporters have been trying to provide clarity and kind of figure out what the impact of some of these orders will or might have. And there are a lot of questions still remaining. I think perhaps maybe that's the understatement of the week right off the top here. The big headline in today's Springfield Republican newspaper, $20 million federal grant program in limbo. Quoting from Greta Yoakum's reporting, in August, the city announced $20 million in federal funds would flow to disadvantaged neighborhoods. Money from the Environmental Protection Agency's Community Change Grants program would provide homes with new roofs and efficient windows, fix roads, monitor air quality, among other things. But after President Donald Trump's inauguration last week and a flurry of executive orders, including one that changed federal climate policies, that $20 million is now in limbo. The report goes on to say that the order tells agencies to pause dispersing funds from the Inflation Reduction Act, the source of Springfield's EPA grant. With the 3-year grant delays in funding could make it harder to meet the government deadlines. And I think that's the big piece here that Tina Quagliato Sullivan brought up to the Republican. Reaction to this move. We'll get into many of the moves that President Trump has made, but reaction to this one, Mike Dobbs.
Well, okay, so I'm trying to remember my civics classes from high school, which were a long time ago. But as I understand, Congress, when it passes budgetary or financial legislation, these things become law.
The power of the purse. Mm-hmm.
So it's law. So can an executive order trump law? And I didn't mean to have a pun there. But the bottom line is these are laws. So we are suspending a law passed by Congress, approved by a president. Is that constitutional? And I think that's one of the primary kind of disconnects that you just spoke to. You're sitting there. You've got this money. You're an agency. The money has come to you legally. You have to disperse it. But now you're having a president say, no, we're suspending this law.
And the city is reacting and saying, well, we're going to have to do that. And I think it becomes even a little more confusing because one of the other memorandums, the other directives that he put out this week relative to a different grant and loan program was in fact rolled back by the administration. And prior to that rolling back of the memo, the court stepped in and said, well, we're going to at least freeze this while we assess the constitutionality that you just touched on, Mike. That program that Greta reported on specifically, to me, stood out as one that I think is really important to the city of Springfield because among the many things it would have done, it would have helped to improve air quality in the city by putting more trees, potentially helping to update the city's climate action plan. And as we all know, Springfield is a city that has very, very high rates of asthma. So when you start to sort of peel back the onion and think about this is the grant program, woulda, shoulda, coulda, it was going to help with XYZ, that's a really tangible impact that we can track around this. Namu or Nirvani, any thoughts on this one?
I would just like to say with the environmental justice piece that you just brought up with this community being an environmental justice community, I've personally reported on a few things in the past about the city's asthma rates and just quality of life here. And so I'm really hopeful that money does have a chance to come to Springfield, just so that people can, have a chance at a better quality of life. But it is a bummer to hear that there's a freeze on that right now.
Yeah, and I mean, just with the pausing of federal grants, and the piece that you touched on, that there are federal judges who are trying to block these things that the president is doing as well. It makes things really confusing for the public, and I think creates a lot of chaos and fear that we've been talking about too in the newsroom, and the difficulty of reporting on this presidency and what's kind of coming out. But specifically with the community and these marginalized communities in Springfield not getting this help and receiving this aid, I think that could be really detrimental.
And Namu, the environmental justice piece that you touched on, perhaps maybe not a huge surprise that the president would have rolled back this specific initiative. It was part of a called the Justice 40 program, which President Joe Biden rolled out in 2021. And President Trump was very clear that a lot of the environmental initiatives that we saw under the Biden-Harris administration were not going to be kept on the table. But to your point, Namu, this Springfield qualifies as an environmental justice population, as does large parts of Chicopee and Holyoke, parts of Westfield, Sunderland, Greenfield, Northampton, and Hadley. That's all according to Greta Yoakum's reporting. And when we look at these environmental justice communities, they're defined by the state as a neighborhood that is low income, that has 40% or more of the population that is minority, or if a quarter or more of households don't speak English fluently. Mike Dobbs, thoughts on that particular piece?
Well, again, this community has worked so hard over the past few years to address asthma rates. There's been such efforts to, I think that some of you will remember the proposed biomass plant that was here in Springfield that was going to basically burn construction waste.
There was a whole social justice organization that started just to block that effort.
Right. And a lot of this had to do with the amount of emissions that would come out of this thing and how it would affect asthma rates. And when you have a poor population, as we do in many of these gateway cities in the valley, the issues of access to proper health care, the issues that surround poverty, this has a lot to do with not only making the life better for people, but it's also economic development as well. So addressing and eliminating this kind of funding reaches a lot of different points all at once.
Some other news that dropped this morning, Nirvani Williams, you reported this. The headline, Western Mass Resettlement Agency feels impact of Trump administration's broad freeze on foreign aid. Nirvani, what did you hear about the impact that is having, that freeze?
Definitely. I did get in touch with the executive director at the Resettlement Agency, Jewish Family Service of Western Massachusetts, Rabbi James Green, and Rabbi Green said the day after Trump was inaugurated, all of the clients that they were going to receive were canceled out of the system, which included 3 family reunification cases, which are intended to reunite family members in the U.S. with their relatives who are refugees. 3 of those cases canceled completely. And Green said they received a stop work order from the federal government last Friday, just as they were writing a check for a family from Afghanistan to move into an apartment in the valley, and that they happened to have money from the state to help this family move in, even though the timeline was sort of delayed for them. But Green said that if they didn't have that money from the state, they don't know what they would have done. So there's been a vast depletion of resources for these resettlement agencies, and Green told me that they're turning to donations from community members to help their clients.
To try and fill in that gap, perhaps, to continue the work. I think I read the number in your story that said the stop work served was specifically related to serving 138 clients, almost 140 people here in Western Massachusetts, just through that one organization. So you can kind of think about the potential ripple effects beyond then. We are going to move on, but I do want to point out something. The Berkshire Eagle had an editorial from January 25th, last Saturday, and said, quote, based on past performance, it might be pointless to plead with the president to rein in his worst impulses for the sake of the nation. If he can't, then it's up to the other leaders, regardless of partisan background, to maintain the checks and balances needed to curtail an executive set on amassing power for dubious ends. Look at these actions for what they are: reactionary, radical, and frightening. If we the people must not look away, either that we might hold them all to that high responsibility. We the people must not look away either, that we might hold them all to that high responsibility. Is how I should have read that the first time. That was from the Berkshire Eagle on January 25th. Well, we'll certainly keep tracking this here, I know, in newsrooms across Western Massachusetts, and talking about it here on the Rundown. Namu Sempath, I'm going to move on to reporting from you this week. Rising lot rent imperil affordability of mobile homes. Some residents are fighting back. This story is part of an occasional series that the Springfield Republican has been doing called The Faces of the Housing Crisis, where you're investigating housing-related issues. You co-reported this with Greta Yoakum, who we talked about a minute ago. And we often know or refer to these units as mobile homes. And it was interesting to read you pointing out that that requires a bit of a clarification, because while technically you can possibly move them, the act of doing that is often cost prohibitive, and so maybe manufactured home is a more appropriate label. So you might hear us use that phrase interchangeably here. And I'm quoting from the story. Amid the state's housing crisis, residents of manufactured home parks are seeing rent increases on the land their homes sit on. It goes on to say that in the last year, increases or proposals to hike rents have been seen in Western Massachusetts communities, including Ludlow, Orange, West Stockbridge, and Munson. What did you hear from residents, Namu, about those increases or proposed increases?
Yeah, so I've been covering this issue since last February, when residents of a Ludlow mobile home park held a session with the press and State Senator Oliveira to discuss this exact issue, the raising of the lot rents that they pay on their homes. A lot of these people are disabled or low income and can't afford to pay, say, a $300 increase on rent.
Because in the Ludlow case, I believe the owner of that property, the rent was about $200 a month. He went before the Rent Control Board, which does govern rent in this particular instance. People think rent control might be gone, but in these instances, it still remains in some communities where there's mobile home parks. Ludlow did approve the rent increase to just a touch over $500. But now there is a legal challenge. So that's a bit of the back and forth that we hear about in your story. But the tensions between the sort of park ownership and park residents has been in the media for at least the last year. Mm-hmm. You reported on it, Reminder Publications, NEPM, the Montague Reporter, lots of local news organizations, television news organizations too, LLP and Western Mass News. They've all been reporting on this issue. What do the ownership of these parks say about the need for these increases?
So a lot of them are saying that the rent increases are necessary to adjust, renovate or upgrade the parks that are, decades old at this point. A lot of them are saying that the market is moving that way, and so they need to kind of live also, and they are saying that these rent increases help them do so.
Right, cover the cost of expenses, upkeep, drainage, sewer, other sort of taxes, insurance, all those business costs that need to be covered and maintained. Mike, I know you were at the Senator Oliveira press conference back in the fall.
Yes, I was.
What did you take away from this?
Well, it's again this disconnect between a person who has, as I understand it, the ownership of the park in Ludlow had changed, and the new owner says that we got to improve the infrastructure at the park because there was a lot of complaints about that. I think that most people weren't aware that folks who live in these, they're also known as trailer parks, may own their trailer, they own their home, but they do not own the land, which puts them in, I think, a very odd situation because if you buy a house, you buy the whole thing. Yeah. If you buy a trailer, you don't buy the whole thing. I thought it was interesting, too, that particular day that The owner walked right past all of his tenants. He was flanked by attorneys. He doesn't want to interact with them. And people don't seem to understand that for many folks, owning a house in a trailer park is the only option they have for anything that resembles home ownership. And
affordable home ownership.
Exactly. And raising these rates is really, really rough on them.
Yeah. And Nemo, one other thing before I move us on, you did point out that there is a model for folks in some of these parks to purchase the parks outright. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so in Chicopee, there has been the tenants have basically formed together a petition to file for ownership of the park. They put in an offer for $4.25 roughly $1 million to buy the whole park. Now they're competing with Tom Lennon, who is the owner of the park in Ludlow that I was speaking about previously.
And also one in West Stockbridge, the Berkshire Eagle has reported that.
Exactly, yes. We'll see what comes out of that shortly.
You'll keep us up to date on that and many more developments with this story. We are going to take a quick break here on the Rundown, but still ahead, prospects for a new courthouse in Springfield, and what's the future of leadership like in the city of Holmes and other cities across Western Mass heading into mayoral elections in many of those communities. The Rundowners will share their thoughts, and you can do the same with our email, therundown@nepm.org. Back in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Rundown. I'm Carrie Saldo, joined in studio today by NEPM reporter Nirvani Williams, Mike Dobbs of the Reminder Publications, and Namu Sunpath of the Springfield Republican. Welcome back, all of you. Going to talk this morning about the verdict on the new Springfield courthouse, and it is going to move forward, but not perhaps in the way that was once thought. This was reported out by Reminder Publications, the Republican, NEPM among them. This news landed last week, but wanted to share it here for the regional importance and relevance. Quoting from Jeanette DeForge's coverage in the Republican, state officials on January 21st agreed to expedite construction of a new Springfield courthouse by leasing a building created by a private developer, but without expressing some trepidation that lobbying efforts by city officials could leave some interested developers in the dust. Even with the state paying for an estimated $30 million a year in rent, there still would be a cost savings of about $154 million over the lifetime of the project. But the biggest benefit would be a private developer could expedite the project and move workers out of an environmentally troubled building that is suspected to have caused the relatively rare neurological disease ALS in at least 5 employees, including 2 judges who share the same office, as well as multiple cancer cases. Mike, I know this is something that you have been watching with interest, and it has been years in the making. What do you make of this most recent development?
Well, it's good news for Peter Picknelly because Picknelly owns property on the riverfront. During Governor Baker's administration, Mayor Sarno really advocated that the governor sort of bypass DCAM altogether.
Which is the Division of Capital Asset Management, which governs this process.
Exactly. That did not fly with Governor Baker. He said you have to go through the process. So now we have stage 2 of this revised process, which is we're not going to own the courthouse. Somebody else is going to own the courthouse. Picknelly is still the person that Sarno wants to be as developer. It's going to be very interesting how this shakes out in terms of other proposals and other developers when they step forward.
Because there are other potential locations on the table, and who knows, more might come to the forefront. But Sarno has said at least 2 times, according to the Republican publicly, that he is in support of this specific riverfront location. And that was some of the concerns that at least one member of the Asset Management Inspector General Office who voted on this said he was voting against it, even though he's in favor of the court project, because he doesn't like the fact that there has already been some public advocacy, and he's concerned it's unfairly skewing it toward that one developer. Now, others on the board said they disagreed with that there's room in the process for other developers to come in just because there's been some lobbying that perhaps that's not a foregone conclusion that we will see this waterfront development happen. But I think the larger thing, too, is that this courthouse was a massive problem. We saw the DA move his staff out. We saw Cheryl Colker Rivera, the Registry of Deeds, move her staff out. We saw complaining and complaints and fears raised by employees for years and years. There was potentially no problem in the building. Then we're going to renovate it while the folks are in it. And now people were moved out and finally perhaps getting a clean place to work. And I really have to credit the Republican here because they stayed on top of this through the years. Stephanie Barry, Janet DeForge, really raising the concerns publicly that these folks had about the cleanliness and the appropriateness of this building to be a safe working environment. Nemu and Nirvani, anything standing out for you in this reporting?
I mean, just noting the health concerns for some of the people who were in the building, I thought that was fascinating, and just the argument against not having the building and moving it to the waterfront location, I thought was really interesting because these are individuals who are actually working in this building who are getting some really serious health concerns from just mismanagement of it. And it
trying to show up every day, do their job.
Exactly. And then it made me think, like, what are the priorities here? You know, what are the true priorities?
Well, the next steps in this process is there's going to be a formal request for proposals, and that's slated to be issued later this year, and then a developer selected in the beginning of 2026. So we will see if it is, in fact, the developer that the mayor has talked about wanting, or if some other developer comes to the forefront. We'll keep watching that. Now, speaking of Mayor Sarno, Mike Dobbs, you had a column recently about another 4 years or not for Springfield Mayor Dominic Sarno. Springfield has the largest population in Western Massachusetts, the fourth largest in New England, which I sometimes forget. So what's happening here is certainly of broader impact for Western Massachusetts, has impacts beyond the city of Holmes. Mike, you're thinking ahead here, though. We're talking 2027 for the potential reelection or another election cycle for Mayor Sarno. What got you thinking about it now?
Well, I'm not thinking ahead. The mayor is thinking ahead. He recently had a fundraiser at the Student Prince restaurant in downtown Springfield, and it was successful. And at that fundraiser, he announced that he was running for another 4 years. And I in my column, I'm just trying to point out the fact that if you believe that you are a good candidate to run against Sarno, you better take his lead here. You should start identifying issues. You should start getting name recognition, because he is not playing. He's starting very early in the cycle to say, I want another 4 years. So I'm not endorsing anyone. I am not endorsing Mayor Sarno, but I am saying is that it's clear that anyone who is considering running for mayor in Springfield, now is the time actually to start, because he started.
And to your point, so the city of Springfield would be voting on a new mayor in 2027, but there are 8 mayoral seats that are actually up for re-election in 2025, according to my count on the Mass Municipal Association's website. We're looking at Agawam, Chicopee, East Hampton, Holyoke, North Adams, Northampton, West Springfield, and Westfield. And we don't know for certain. The majority of those seating mayors haven't even necessarily come out and said, absolutely, I am running. And that's happening in 2025. 2027, Mayor Sarno is already ready, publicly announcing that he's going to be running for re-election. We know in East Hampton that Mayor LaChapelle is not seeking another term. She said that months ago. And others have, like Holyoke Mayor Josh Garcia, have said they are seeking re-election. Namu, you're nodding to that. And I know you do some coverage in Holyoke. As you're looking at Mayor Garcia coming out ahead of the fact that he's running again in 2025, are you listening for whether there's going to be another challenger, or do you think it'll be open seat and he'll just waltz right back into office?
Well, I actually cover Chicopee, not so much Holyoke, but I do think that, just reading along with what April, my colleague at the Republican, does, I'm not sure if there will be. I wonder if there'll be a new candidate for mayor.
I think it's interesting to watch with the receivership issue that's happening there with state control leaving and coming back to local control of education, whether Mayor Garcia's hand in that and shepherding of that will be an asset and something, because it's something the community certainly wanted to see, was that local control coming back. Thinking about North Adams, I was thinking about how Mayor Jennifer Maxey, she's up for re-election. There was this big controversy that we talked about a few times here on the show at the Notch Reservoir, and it was a controversial proposal whether or not to cut trees in that area. A lot of people in the community were really concerned about the environmental impact of it. Initially, Mayor Maxey was supportive of the idea, and then we saw in recent weeks, toward the end of last year, she decided to roll back that decision. So it'll be interesting to watch as that race unfolds, if that issue has ignited a fire in someone's belly and they'll come out be a challenger there. So those are the issues that I'm sort of watching. Mike, on that list of 8 mayoral seats, anything that jumps to mind for you?
All right, put me on the spot there, Kaylee. John View, I think, probably is going to run again.
In Chicopee.
In Chicopee. And well, you're covering Chicopee, so you know better, but I have a sneaking suspicion after covering Chicopee for 20 years that he will be unopposed.
Yes.
Chris Johnson in Agawam, I think he'll probably be unopposed. I'm sure that he'll probably run for another term. What were some of the others?
Gina Louise Shara
Oh,
from Northampton.
I don't know her well enough to say. Will Reichel, that's a given.
West Springfield.
No one ever runs against
But
him.
I did think in your column, Mike, what I did appreciate is you said, quote, the job of mayor, if done correctly, is the hardest job in government. A mayor must be an expert in not only his own municipal government or her own municipal government and how it works, but also the ins and outs of state and federal government. So perhaps not unsurprising that you're sitting here saying, I don't think there may be many challengers for these folks. It's not an easy job.
No, it's a very difficult job. This is a job. People stop you if they see you in the grocery store. They'll stop you on the stairs of your church where you go to worship. I mean, when you're mayor, your constituents really feel invested in being able to talk to you, and that's not like any other job in politics, basically.
Yeah, it's a 24/7 and job, and perhaps benefited from Instacart and home delivery because maybe you don't have to bump into people in the grocery store anymore. You can just have your groceries delivered to your doorstep.
And you have to show up for all of the events that we cover as reporters. Mayors are usually there.
Yeah, I think you eat a lot of terrible pasta and overcooked pancakes in the course of a 4-year election cycle, I would imagine. All right, I'm going to head us toward our Scoops, Praise, and Prediction portion of the morning, where we ask our panel to make a prediction about the news, give us a scoop on a story that you're working on, or maybe heap some praise on something you read in the Western Mass News this week. I will start with you, Namu Sempath. Prediction, scoop, praise?
I wanted to shout out an occasional series that I'm working on called Breaking Bread, which is the exploration of food, culture, and business in the Valley, Pioneer Valley. I am on the lookout for any restaurants that kind of, bring something more to the table, and really excited to explore, and I love food, so...
Great.
Yeah.
We'll be looking for that.
You.
How about for you, Nirvani Williams? Double duty this morning, morning edition and the rundown.
Yeah. I actually wanted to shout out Namu's story too. Just the story that you had on investigating claims that Chicopee's ex-housing director was accused of discriminating tenants based on race and disability. It was just excellent reporting all around. And NEPM's Carrie Healy, who hosts Morning Edition, interviewed Namu on it, and it aired during Morning Edition when I was hosting this morning. So folks can check it out on our website. It was really cool.
Lots of connective tissue there. Mike Dobbs, how about for you? Scoop, praise, prediction?
I'm torn. I'm torn between letting everyone know that this is National Gorilla Suit Day.
Oh, very important information.
What?
I'm shocking my colleagues here.
People are Googling like crazy. National Gorilla Suit Day.
And the alarming trend I've been seeing in television commercials for local companies, and they're using actors with Boston accents. Big Y has got a commercial, and everyone's talking like they're from Boston. And then MGM has this obnoxious actor who's walking around saying about "pak ya ka," and I'm going, we don't talk like that
A
here.
Boston accent does not Western Massachusetts make.
No.
You heard it here on the
It does
rundown,
not.
and forever may it be
Oh,
true.
God.
You're not parking your car in Springfield. All right. Well, that's this morning's edition of The Rundown. My sincere thanks to Mike Dobbs, Namu Sunpath, and Nirvani Williams.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Carrie.